Hi there, and welcome to this introduction to layers in Photoshop. And in this introduction, we're going to go through the basic elements of layers, why we should use them, and what they can do. So let's jump straight in. First of all, why would we use layers? And why not just work on the photograph as we see it in the desktop here? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one being, layers are a way of keeping your workflow organized and keeping your image organized. It's a way of keeping your work undamaged. For instance, if I work on this background here and save this, then this image is saved as Photoshop is what we call a destructive editing package. And what that means is when we save it, whether we're using the brush tool, the stamp tool, the clone tool, or for instance the erase tool, if we remove those parts of the picture and we save it, close the image down, that is it. When we open it again, we can't go back to its original state. However, by using layers, it allows us to save the work with layers on top of each other. For instance, like a stack of papers, one sheet on top of another, and we can use those, keep our work ordered, work on top of another layer without damaging the work below it. And it's a way of working on one layer without affecting any other layers below it. If we look at the image here, we have a flower, make it a little bit bigger so we can see it better, on a nice dark background. And if we look to the right hand side of the screen, you can see we have a background layer. Now, the background layer has a little padlock to the side of it, which means you can't delete this layer. It stays put. If you want to change that as you go along, click on the padlock and it disappears. And then to lock it again, click on the little padlock at the top of the palette. First of all, let's use our quick selection tool, W on your keyboard, and select the backdrop. So we're selecting the background, the black. What I can do with this, if I want to, is copy this, Command C or Control C, and Command V or Control V, and we will paste in a new layer above the background layer. And when we, on the right hand side here in the layers palette, the layer that's light grey is the layer that's active, and any work we do on this layer will not affect the one below it. If we make the one below it active, the work we do on this won't affect the one above it. You'll also notice a little icon by the side of it. And what this does, it turns on the layer and off. So when we turn on top and bottom, this top layer, nothing seems to happen. Turn off the bottom layer, we can see that we've selected the background and not selected the flower. I'm going to delete this layer by clicking on it and dragging it to the trash bin. Going back to our background layer, selected W again, and I've selected all the black. But what I'm going the black again. What I'm now going to do is go to the top toolbar and go down and click Inverse. And what this does now, it changes the selection from being all around the black to the flower. We'll do the same process as we did before. Command or Control C to copy it, and Command or Control V to paste it. And you can see in the layers palette we have a layer showing flower. And if we undo the layer underneath it, you can see it's only a quick selection. That's all we need for this demonstration. If we use our Move tool at the top of the tool palette, now you'll notice that I keep my tool palette on the right hand side, whereas many people keep it on the left, and Photoshop default positions on the left. I like it on the right because this is where my hand and my eye work with it nice and easy. Let's go to the top of the tool palette, select the Move tool, or we can use the V key. And as you see, if we drag it, we can move that up a layer around, and it's not affecting the layer below it. So another thing we can do is transform that layer by pressing Control T or Command T, we get the transform tool up, and then we can resize it. And here's a tip for you: if you hold down the Shift key, it keeps the aspect ratio. You see, it's staying square as I pull it up and down. Back to V for the move tool, and then we can move that over here. And you see we now have 2 layers. Now the next thing we can do is we can copy this layer or duplicate it. We can go up here to the top toolbar under the layers tools and click copy, and it will give us a copy of layer 1. You can see it's named it there, layer 1 copy. Or the other thing we can do is use the keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control J. And there we are. We have a copy of the layer below us. Now, going back to V, the move tool, we can take that layer and move it over here. We can use the transform tool again to make it bigger. Now this time I'm not holding down the Shift key, and you can see how that works. So I'll hold down the Shift key. There we are, keeping size. So we'll make that one a little bigger and press enter. Back to the move tool, and we can place that where we want to. So now we have a nice image with 3 flowers. Just to recap quickly, it's always the active layer that we are moving. So the highlighted layer, as you can see on the top right hand side, and that's always the layer that is active and being affected. Using the eye, we can turn off those layers as we wish to, even the background layer. We can also rearrange those layers to a different order. And it doesn't matter which order we have them, but just remember that the highlighted layer is the one that is active. But also, if we look here now, it's also the highlighted layer, or the top layer, that's the one that covers what's below it. So we can see this flower slipping under the layer that's above it now, even though it's not highlighted. If I leave it here, highlight this layer, this moves above it. If I drop it down in the layer stack, I'm still on this layer moving it, but now it slides underneath. So there we go. So that's a quick introduction to layers and how they work, and how multiple layers can affect an image. Let's just do one more layer. We'll duplicate the layer again, and we now have layer 1, a copy of layer 1, and then we have layer 1 copy 2. Let's rename these by double clicking, and we'll just name this as 3, 2, 1. So we'll just quickly double click and we can change the names like that. Now another thing that's really useful with layers, particularly when you're working on a large image where you might have 20, 30, 40, 50 layers sometimes, useful to group your layers together to help you keep organized. And one of the first things I said about using layers, it's a way to keep your work organized. So I'm just going to do that now. So as you see, we've made a duplicate layer and the duplicate layers of this flower here. And what we'll do is we'll make a group. So how I do this is I highlight both layers and I press Command or Control G, and we now have a group with 2 layers inside it. Once again, we'll highlight that and name it as flowers. So we'll name it as 2 flowers. Now, just as we can turn off an individual layer, we can turn off an individual group, like so. And also individually within the group. So it's a good way of keeping yourself organized. Now, the next thing I want to talk about in layers is layer blending modes and opacity. Now we'll start with opacity. So we're going to highlight layer 1, which is the flower on the right hand side. And if you look further up in the top right corner, you'll see a little box that says opacity. We click on there, we can take the opacity of that down to around about there, 50 something %. And you can see that layer is now half as bright as it was. We can move it around, and it's still, whenever we move it, still only half as bright. This is really useful when compositing images, and it's really useful, I find it really useful when doing skin retouching. I think we understand how opacity works now. So the next thing we're going to work on is blending modes. Now, blending modes can get quite complicated, and there are subtle changes between various blending modes. So I'm just going to cover the basics here, just to make things easy for you, so you can see how a layer can work. At the top of the layers palette, you'll see this drop-down menu. It always starts on normal, and we're going to drop it down to give us all these various blending modes. We're going to cover just two to start with, the darken and the lighten, because they're easier to understand. So I'm going to make a new layer, go down to the palette here, click on new layer. I'm going to switch to the brush tool, which is B. Let's change the color by clicking on the dropper here, and we'll go to somewhere like that. Let's double check the brush. Brush is fine. And we'll check our opacity. We've got 100% opacity and 100% flow. So let's make this here. Now, as I mentioned before, that's on its own layer, a new layer, so we can move that around where we want. And because it's under the layer of the group layer, it's going underneath these flowers. Above the background layer, above layer 1, but underneath layer 2 and 3, which are grouped together in the two flowers group. Let's bring it back over here. So we're going to move down to layer 1, which is this layer here, and we're going to change the blending mode. So the first thing we'll do is go down to darken. Now, you'll also see there are another 4 blending modes under the darken, which are all to do with darkening the image. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move the layer 1 above the brush layer. And this allows me to move it around. So let's change this back to darken. It disappears. But as it means that the layer is still there. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this layer right to the very top. So we can see there. And essentially what's happening is this. Any pixels in this layer that are darker than the layer below will show up. See on the light of the flower, we can see the center of the flower moving because it's darker than below. If we bring it to the center, we don't see it. We don't see it here because they're not darker than the background. The background's too dark. If we bring it over this one, you can see how the color changes because these pixels on this flower, we'll see, we can get a bit there. The pixels are the same color here, but as they're varying color, they are reacting with the lighter blue color to go a darker color. So let's bring that up there. In the darken mode, anything in this layer that is darker than the layer below it will have precedent. It will make that darker. Now if we change it to lighten, and you'll see there's some more lighten modes here. Watch what happens. So we're dragging it over the image again, over this image, and we can see what's happening is that any pixels that are lighter than below, the layer below, will show through. So the dark center doesn't show through because it's not lighter than the black in the background. When we move over here, we can see those lighter pixels again there. And if we bring it over to our brush squiggle, our light blue, you can see some of those pixels are showing through again, but because we have a blue streak, they are changing the colour. And once we move over here, you can see the effect where the lighter pixels are showing through and the dark ones aren't. So that's a quick introduction to blending modes. There's lots more to it, and there are some subtle differences, and I'll cover blending modes in another tutorial. But that's where we are at the moment with opacity and blending. I can go back to this while I'm blending and change the opacity if I want to. Let's see the effect that has. So it's probably most dramatic here. These pixels are lightening the edge of the flower here, and they are not really showing through, just subtly. But if we go back to increase our opacity, they show through stronger. And finally for this tutorial, a brief introduction to masks. If we look at the bottom of the palette, the layers palette, we've already used the trash can, we've already used the new layer, we haven't used a new folder yet, we haven't used an adjustment layer, we haven't used special effects or a link as yet, and haven't used masks, but we're now going to use a mask. A mask allows you to cover or mask out certain parts of the image. So if you watch the top layer in the right hand side now, when I click the mask, we get a white box, which is a mask next to our top layer. So let me just bring this layer up here so I can see it better. So we've got the mask. Now, there's a basic rule when we come to masks. If this box is white, it means you can see what's going on. If it's black, it'll hide it. So the little mantra is white reveals, black conceals. What we can do is change the mask from white to black, to inverse it. We can go to selection and down to inversion, inverse there, Command, Shift and I, or we can just do those keyboard removals. Oops. Now, we can see as we've filled in black conceals, we can no longer see our flower on that layer. If we go back to the mask, where white will reveal it. So white reveals, black conceals. So what about this? We'll go back to black, conceal it. And if we go to our B for our brush tool and check here in the default color picker, brush tool picker, we see that white is our foreground color. Now if we paint white on the black, watch what happens. We are getting the flower below to reveal. We can take down the opacity of our brush and get less of the flower, like that. Let's take it back up to 100. Now, one of the beauties of masks is if we've gone too far, we can change this color here, press X on the keyboard, black comes to the front, and then black conceals again. Or take it down to 50% and it only conceals part of it. So as you can see, masks are really useful in helping to hide, partly reveal parts of an image you may want or not want to show. I'm just going to show you a live example of how the Photoshop images work. Okay, so here we have an image I've been working on recently. It's a photograph we took at the portrait group about a year ago, I think, and it's a composite. So let's do this. Let's turn off some of these layers. Now, this is our original layer, background layer of photographs of the locker room. You see some small adjustments to each layer. Then we've added our subject to it. Then we'll do some dodging and burning. You can't see it too much on this one, but it's mainly in the background and up the top of the, there we go. Add the curves layer, which is an adjustment layer which we'll cover in the next tutorial. I've had another curves layer. There's only affecting certain parts of the image. And you can also see these two grey layers are called dodge and burn layers, and they will be covered in the next tutorial, more advanced tutorial. And dodge and burn layers are one of the very, very best things I've discovered about working with layers. Adjustment layers and dodge and burn layers are fabulous ways of working. So if you watch the image now, particularly around the girl's arms and tummy, you'll see how the dodge and burn layer works. Turned on, turned off. And let's just quickly open this final JPEG. There we are, and this would be the final JPEG where I've flattened all of the layers down to reveal one image. We'll go back to this image. You can see all of these layers here. Now, if we save the file like this, it saves as a Photoshop PSD. Now, so it's saving, you see the bottom left, it's saving. And because it's such a big document with many layers on it, sometimes takes a little bit of time to save. And you can see in the top left, it says PSD here. And if we were to save it now, we'd want to be a Photoshop. The way around these big files is to flatten your image, which would be Command Shift and E or Control Shift and E. Flattens it to one down, save it as, and then you have the option to change from PSD Photoshop file to a JPEG file. It makes it much smaller. I cancel that because I don't want to do that. I'll undo that, and I'll close the image down, not without saving it. So there we are. That's a brief tutorial on layers, an introduction to layers, and look out for the next one where we'll be covering masks in further detail. We'll be covering adjustment layers, and also we'll be covering dodging and burn layers. Hope you enjoyed that. Look out for more. Thanks very much. This is Nick Gregan saying cheery bye.